Good morning, everyone. And I guess morning if you're in Boston, actually. Hello, everyone is probably a better way to start. And welcome to Level 1, Session 5 of the Berklee Accessible Music Education Study Group. I'm Dr. Rhoda Bernard. It's a pleasure to be back with you this morning. It has been a lot of fun for me to read your between session engagement responses to some of the sessions that you've had over the last couple of weeks. And if you haven't filled those out, we'll be talking logistics again. I'll go over study group logistics towards the end of today's session. So just as an overview of today, big picture before we get started, this session, which goes for 3 hours, is on assessment and additional strategies, teaching strategies for working with disabled students in music education settings. In the afternoon, or our 1 o'clock session, is about behavior management, and it's with my dear colleague Victoria Laricchia, who is a special educator and a musician and a music educator. She's on our graduate faculty at Berklee College of Music in our Master of Music and Music Education with a concentration in music and autism, and our graduate certificate in music and education and autism programs, where she teaches 2 fantastic courses. So I highly recommend the time that you'll get to spend with Vicki as well. I'd like to get right to it and share the proper PowerPoint, which is this one. Nope, wrong one. Fun. Okay, there we go. So let me stop the share and reshare to make sure it's right, and share sound for video. All right, here we are, and let's turn this into a slideshow. Okay. Let me pull the Zoom part up. All right, I think we're all set up. So here we are today. I am going to start off with some introductory material about the work of the Institute for those of you who haven't seen it in one of my prior sessions. That's a short period of time, and then we will get right into rolling up our sleeves and doing the work. This is more of a working session. I mean, there is presentation content, don't get me wrong, but there are opportunities for you to respond to questions and to actually come up with ideas for assessments that you will use, and to think about the assessments that you already do use. So it's a working session as well. So just to give you an introduction to our institute and our work, this is our video that was produced in July 2022.
At the Guitar Center, one of his favorite places. It's like a kid in a candy store. And he'll just start playing with accompanying whatever song is going on. People have stopped to listen. I mean, and then they say, wow, what do you do? Where do you get? And I'm Berklee, the Berklee program. That's what I say to them, because that's where he does all this.
Music education is one of the most transformative departments at our institution. When we merged with the Boston Conservatory, one of the jewels in the crown was the formation of the Institute for Accessible Arts Education.
That merger made it possible for us to create the Institute and for us to expand the art forms that we work in, so not just music, and the disability populations that we work with, not just autism. And that has continued to grow.
In our program, we celebrate what makes people different and encourage these young artists to be themselves.
I love classic rock and modern rock. Bands like Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and AC/DC, and Black Sabbath, Motorhead.
Zach is one of the students who I've worked with closely and very directly as a mentor. Developing his musicianship, I give him some degree of career counseling and some advice for the professional world.
We get to see those very, very first interactions with music. We get to discover these 3-year-olds that have perfect pitch, who memorize a song the first time they hear it. We get to see these little sparks, and we get to take it as far as they will go.
I think it's a human right to get to experience music and make music with other people and express yourself through music.
I'm the proud mother of Ashton. He was nonverbal until he was about 7. Then he starts singing along, and I'm like, whoa. And he is fully verbal right now.
You were the shadow to my life.
He's very snarky, he's got this little personality, and he loves his teachers at Berkeley.
Ashton's the best. Like, he's such a funny kid. These kids are so full of life and full of personality. They spend so much of their time in a society that tries to like stifle who they are, and then they're in a musical setting where they can really thrive and be themselves and be creative, and it's like you just watch them blossom.
One of the special things about our program is that it is linked to a master's degree in music education with an autism concentration. It's the only program like it in the country.
Students know when the teacher doesn't believe in them, oh yes. And they also know when the teacher does. Arts educators receive almost no training and very little support in how to teach anybody who's not a typical, whatever that is, learner.
Whatever the change is, preview with them. But there's other ways to teach that include everybody, and that's what we're learning about in my courses.
Studying music ed and autism and getting to also teach hands-on, the two really inform one another.
We're all sharing experiences that we've had and influencing each other in ways that we never would have been able to had this program not existed.
Welcome to the final performance.
I learn so much from my students every day about what is communication, what is music making, what is good music, what's a musical experience.
And so I really try to enter their realm. I try to understand how they understand the world by watching how they interact with the world.
It's a joyful experience to see them really shine and to know that I played a small part in getting them there. But it's also been humbling because I'm constantly reminded that I'm never going to fully see the world through somebody else's eyes or walk in somebody else's shoes.
When you have all the labels that he has, there's this expectation everywhere that he's pretty limited. And it's actually quite the opposite.
He has a T-shirt that says, "Autism is my superpower." Really, it's a superpower that helps all of us to be more and to stretch more and understand more and be more flexible.
I am really having a great time here at Berkeley. And thanks so much for your time.
Great. So let me get back to the slideshow. Here we are. Okay. So we are the Berkeley Institute for Accessible Arts Education, a catalyst for the inclusion of disabled people in all aspects of visual and performing arts education. We have the acronym Arts Better the Lives of Everyone, which spells out ABLE. We use it to describe many of the things that we do. Our work takes place in 3 main streams. The first is our direct service work. We offer arts education programs for people with disabilities. They are weekly, community-based programs for people ages 3 to 93. We serve over 300 people every week in these programs. And that's a full list I'll move my picture out of the way for a sec. That's a full list of all that we offer. I think it's 13 music programs, 2 adaptive dance programs, and a theater program. The music programs range from sit on the floor, early young children classes for people as young as 3, to private lessons and other things you would expect, like a rock band and a chorus, but also some things you wouldn't expect, like bucket drumming and music technology, music history, ear training, and starting this fall, music theory. And things like ukulele and an ensemble made of iPads. So it's a very wide range set of offerings. And with the technology, history, ear training, and theory, we're really aiming for a comprehensive curriculum. And we're moving towards a certificate for that comprehensive curriculum. We also offer a week, and these are all on Saturdays on our campus, or online any day of the week. We serve people all over the world online. And we also have 2 weeks of a summer music day camp. You saw excerpts of that in the video. And we have a couple of adaptive dance programs and a theater program as well. I'm going to move the slide forward. The second stream is our graduate programs. We have only on the planet master's degree in music education with a concentration in music and autism, and a graduate certificate in music education and autism. Our graduate students are incredible. And the master's degree is 33 credits. The graduate certificate is 15. These programs are designed for working teachers with courses in the summers and then in the evenings during the academic year. And it is possible to participate synchronously remotely by Zooming into classes and sessions. So we have people who, for example, come to Boston in the summers, but then go back home to keep their jobs during the academic year. And we even have people who year-round are with us remotely. This is the core 5 3-credit graduate seminars that focus on accessible music education, a foundational course that links to special education, a very deep dive into autism spectrum disorders from a historical, psychological, sociological, biological, critical perspective, a course that Vicki teaches on taking behavioral teaching approaches that are evidence-based from special education and mapping them on to music education, and a 2-course sequence that I teach called Research to Practice in Music Education and Autism, where we look at the research and apply it to practice and conduct our own research on our own teaching practice. More graduate students because they rock. The third stream of what we do is our professional development work. Of course, you are participating in one of our hallmark professional development offerings, but we have a whole lot of different professional development offerings to serve the field. And they include our Able Assembly Conference, which is every April. Those are the 2024 dates. It is hybrid. You can participate in person or online. That's been a very successful event. I think we've been doing it for 13 or 14 years now. So we're very, very happy with that conference. We have a symposium every fall, the Saturday before Thanksgiving, that is also hybrid. It will be November 18th this year. We do study groups like this. We have just submitted our application for funding for next school year's study groups. We change the curriculum of the study groups every time. There are certain foundational things that we keep the same, though we update them, but then there's other things that come in and out of the curriculum. We do workshops and mini courses for arts organizations, schools, school districts around the world. I've done online courses. I designed and taught 4 online courses in this field for the Kennedy Center in the summer of, what would that be, 2021. I do a whole lot of conference presentations, including keynotes, but also other presentations and workshops at conferences. We have an online searchable database of resources for arts educators in teaching students with disabilities. It's called the Able Arts Resource Center. It is free. It has lesson plans, books, articles, videos, workshops, presentations, all kinds of resources. And you can search it. You can put in a particular diagnosis, a particular age range, or a particular musical setting, and up will come those resources for you. We have a very active blog. It posts monthly Able Snapshots, which focuses on teaching strategies in different art settings for people with disabilities. We do consultations regularly with individual teachers, groups of teachers, organizations, school districts, administrators. We convene a leadership network where leaders in the field come together and share best practices. We have a very active podcast that releases episodes twice a month. Those are, they feature artists with disabilities who are guest hosts who then interview other artists with disabilities. So I would interview the guest host first, and then they would do a series of episodes, that sort of thing. Really, really great. And we've got people from all over the world who participate in that podcast, and it's fully accessible. We have transcripts of all of the audio episodes, and when we have deaf guests or guest hosts, they are video episodes with ASL interpretation. So that gives you an idea of many of the things we offer. You can, those items on the right-hand side, you can access through our website. All of it, really, you can. So now we're going to get into the work of the day around assessment. And there's a lot here that I'm very excited about. So we've got some questions here, and I just want to take these in turn and get your responses. You can type your response. I believe you have access to the Q&A. You may also have access to the chat. I can monitor both of those. So type your response where you would like to the first, whoops, we lost our slide. To the first, that's because of this. Okay, I need to make that go away. Hold on one second. Oh, okay, I can pull it out of the way. Perfect. So the first question, why do we assess our students? Open question. I'd love to see your responses. Why do we assess our students? I will wait some time because I know typing takes time. And if there is somebody who would like to speak, I can also enable that. But I was imagining these first questions would be more typed answers. So why do we assess our students? And we're getting something. Great, we've got both places activated. All right. Moniz, we assess our students to figure out whether they are comprehending what they know and to use that information to inform our teaching. I love this. So we have to figure out whether they understand. We also have to understand what our students know. And the big piece is that we want to use that information to inform how we teach. Julie, to evaluate what they already know and help guide what we teach. Oh boy, we're on the same page. Michelle, to see if they understand the material we're teaching. Yes, you can't just put it out into the ether, right? We need that feedback to make sure they understand. Jasmine, we assess them so we can monitor their progress and see how we can help them get to their goal efficiently. I love that because that's how we assess our students, but that's also, of course, how artists and musicians assess themselves. We have goals, and we assess our progress toward those goals and think about how we can meet those goals more efficiently. Fabiana, to understand what students know, and in the end, what they understand. Great. All of this is true and fantastic. And it's important as we think about the remaining questions on this page, which will also, the answers will also contribute to the why, right? So who are assessments for? Who are they for? Who benefits from that information? Who needs that information? Who do we do it for? We've referred to this a little bit, but I want to hear more of your ideas. Jasmine, for the teachers. Fabiana, for students and teachers. Students and facilitators, lovely. Just getting so the questions are set. Give it a little more time. Who are assessments for? They have different purposes for students and teachers, but benefit both. Sure. I'm going to add something. They're not just for students and teachers. They might be for parents or family members so that they understand how their student is doing. They might also be for administrators, especially if you're in a school setting, especially in the US, where music is not always considered equal with the other subjects and can sometimes be sacrificed, shall we say. Assessments are also advocacy tools, because you can see how students are doing and you can demonstrate that, yes, we do assess our students in systematic ways, and that's a big part of what we do. So I see assessment as also communicating to the student's family so that they know where their student's at, and communicating more broadly to the school community and to administrators. Fantastic. So next question. What are the goals of assessments? You see, we're getting at these things, but I want to pull it all together. What are the goals of assessments? What are we seeking to accomplish when we assess? This gets at the first question, but I want to see if we can think about it a little bit differently. What are the goals of assessments? Reflection on learning strategies. I love thinking about assessments as reflection. I think that's really powerful, Fabiana. That is definitely one goal. There are many. To see if certain skills have been attained so we can move forward with a more complex concept, Michelle. So we need to make sure we've got A before we add B. I hear you. So that's the goals are really to help teachers track where students are so we can get them to the next place. Moniz, to inform teacher practice, to help students reflect on their own learning. Absolutely. And I would add to help other people realize that music matters, importantly, and to help people see the systematic aspects of music education. People who are outside of music education, or people whose music education wasn't sequential and systematic and thought through carefully, don't understand necessarily that music education is those things. So you hear my agenda there. What are the benefits of assessment? What good does assessment do for us? What are the benefits? Once again. If you were, another way to think about it, if you weren't assessing, what would you be missing out on? If you weren't assessing your student, what would you be missing out on? Students can see their improvement. You bet. I love that. Because sometimes when you're in it, right, you can't see that you're improving, or if, you know, you're not where you wish you were, but you don't appreciate the improvement that you've already made. So one great benefit is that students can appreciate what they've learned, how far they've come. They can see their improvement. You bet. It allows us to advocate for our students' programs in informed sequential practice and help students to become independent. Yes, Moniz, on all of those. I love the independence piece. It's something we're going to get back to later today. Let's move on. What are the challenges of assessment in music education settings? This is a biggie. I'm going to give you a few minutes here. Assessment's not easy in music education. What are the challenges? Or some of them? Why is it hard to assess in music education settings? As I said, you can use either the Q&A or the chat. Both are great. Michelle, she's just got number one. I think she's going to have more to say. Many times students that have difficulties with reading or writing don't have their special education teacher with them. Right? She's already thinking about students with disabilities. I didn't even go that far. But sometimes not having the special education teacher with the students can be a challenge. I was just looking at music education more broadly, but you go, hit me with this because we're going to get there. So it's all good. Other challenges. What's challenging? Challenges when you want to assess students in music education settings. Number two, some students don't take music seriously no matter how hard we try. You bet, that is challenging. Jasmine, one of the challenges is creating a specific rubric for the assessment. We will be talking about that. We will be looking at rubrics today. So Jasmine, hopefully we'll help you with that. Monice, being able to look at individuals when you have only whole class settings. That is hard. Keeping track of a large, huge number of students. You bet. Some music educators say 600, 800 students a week. How in the world can you keep track of that? Another challenge, the shorter amount of time you have with the students. If you're lucky, 30 minutes, 45 minutes once a week, that's challenging. It is almost exclusive observation when you assess. And once that moment is gone, it's gone. Thank you, Monice. Really important points. Fabiana, if assessing a performance, I feel, is not fair, since a student may only need more time to achieve level 4. So it might just be a matter of time that when the assessment comes, the student's at a certain place, and if they just had more time, they'd get to another place, and that's frustrating and challenging. Great. Other challenges. I'm going to leave this open for a little bit longer. I need to turn off my video for a second and handle a cat moment. I'll be right back. Stay with it. Challenges for assessment. Okay, let me get back the video. Can't get the video that way. Captions, raise hand. Ah, there it is. Okay, cat crisis averted. Any other thoughts about challenges of assessment, particularly in music education? I feel like we may be there with the answers to this. I'll give it another little bit of time just in case. Another minute. Why is it challenging, or how is it challenging to assess our students in music education settings? One thing I'm surprised I didn't see when I ask this question to folks, often I get the people think music is just a creative endeavor, And how do you assess creativity? How do you determine that one student's creativity is at a different level than another's, that's challenging and hard to be objective on assessments? But we didn't hear that today. All right, let's move on. So we've considered some questions about assessment. What does assessment look like? Here are some, certainly not an exhaustive list, and we're going to talk about others as we move forward, but here are some. Observations, Moniz talked about observations. So observing our students and finding some way to document it, right? Checklists, rubrics, I think it was Jasmine who mentioned rubrics with dimensions, self-assessment, peer assessment. What could those look like? These are just some forms. This is not an exhaustive list, but some forms that we're going to consider. So documenting observations. So Moniz talked about this a lot. When you've got I talked about this earlier, when you've got a big bunch of students you're dealing with every week, right? It's not possible to do individualized assessments with every student every week. Can't happen. It's not even possible to observe every student every week. I argue that you pick a couple of students each class session that you observe and you document it quickly. You know, date, whatever the concept or skill is, what you observed, and your initials, right? Simple, quick notes, something you can do while class is happening or in the 5 seconds you have afterwards, right? Simple, simple, simple. So we want to keep it something we can do quick. Observing is great, and we observe our students all the time. That extra step of documenting it is a really helpful thing in terms of providing our students and ourselves with assessment data. So the advantages of documenting observation, it gives documentation to something we're already doing. It also, when you're going to document it, prompts you to observe more carefully because you're looking for what you're going to write down. You want to make sure you have something specific. And it helps to ensure that you observe everybody. So you might say, in today's class, I'm going to observe these 5, and the next class, I'm going to observe these 4. And over time, it might take several sessions, you get a chance to observe everybody. The disadvantage is, how can we make it simple? Because we don't have bandwidth for additional work. And there's so many students to keep track of. How do you prioritize, right? Very challenging. Another kind of assessment is a checklist. Checklists are essentially, is something present? So this is a composition checklist. Did the person put the clef, the time signature, the key? Are there, based on the assignment, 2 sets of quarter notes and eighth notes and 1 rest? Phrase markings for 2 4-bar phrases, 1 chord per bar, starts and ends on the C chord, is the 5 chord in the 4th bar. You get the idea that these were all requirements for the assignment, and did the student meet the requirements? So it's a presence or absence, yes or no. You could do a similar checklist for a recorded performance. Did they play hot cross buns with the left hand on top, you know, et cetera, right? Proper fingerings, all of that. So presence and absence. And that's what I say right up top. Checklists are really good when is it there or not? We're not looking at how it is, just is it there? So it's really good for things that are simple and clear. Skills or components of an assignment like that composition, right? They can be quick to use because it's a check if it's there, an X if it's not, however you want to do it. A Y or an N, yes or no, right? You can standardize it across the group, and it's very easy to interpret. You see a checklist with all check marks, that students nailed it. You see a checklist with all X's or N's for no's, that students having challenges. It's very easy to eyeball and interpret. Checklists are not good for things that are more complex. They are not good if you have longer form responses, and they are not good to customize to individual students. Checklists are great about standardization. The assignment must have these components. The performance of hot cross buns must have these things that we discussed, right? You can't, the idea is that we're using the same checklist for everyone. So that's checklists. Rubrics, don't worry, we will spend more time with these, but Rubrics are multi-dimensional assessments that are often shared with students before they are expected to do the assignment or work on the assignment or task. They have different either skills or components that are being assessed, and then different levels, a level 1, a level 2, a level 3. This is a recorder karate. You see the belt earned at the bottom, right? For those of you who recognize it. So rubrics have advantages and they have disadvantages. One of the great things about rubrics is it makes it very clear what the criteria are for success. So if you're assessing pitch accuracy, right? And you have level 1, pitches are not accurate. Level 2, pitches are accurate about a quarter of the time. Level 3, pitches are accurate about half the time. Level 4, pitches are accurate throughout the composition. It's very clear that the students are being assessed on what percentage of the pitches they're getting right. And if they get more pitches right, they get a higher number on the rubric, right? So it makes the criteria very clear. It's best, in my opinion, with an even number of levels. So if you look at this rubric, it has an odd number of levels, 1, 2, 3. I don't like rubrics with odd numbers of levels because you end up giving a lot of 2s, right? The thing, if there was a 1, 2, 3, 4, you have to pick a side of the middle. Is it a 2 or a 3? Right? Here with the 1, 2, 3, if someone's in the middle, you know, with the normal distribution, the middle becomes a very large part of the curve. So I like even numbers like 4 because you have to pick, is it a 2 or is it a 3, right? So, oops, I went backwards. Here we go. So best with an even number of levels. One great advantage of rubrics is that students can often, I think, in effective practice, you share them with the students before. It clarifies expectations. You're going to be asked to give a performance of Hot Cross Buns. You are going to be assessed with the following rubric that shows students exactly what your expectations are for them. It's good for complex assignments or performances because you are assessing on multiple dimensions: pitch, rhythm, breath control, right? Technique or position, right? Knowing playing position versus rest position, that sort of thing. So having those different rows on the rubric allows for complexity. You can standardize rubrics across the class. You use one rubric for the assignment, everybody's graded on that rubric. You can also customize rubrics for particular students, as we will talk about. So you may have a student who, because of where they're at, needs a customized rubric. Rubrics are also great because students can use them for self-assessment. If you give out the rubric before they are expected to complete the task, they can use that to assess themselves as they are preparing that assignment or task. Disadvantages of rubrics: inter-rater reliability. This is a biggie. So if we were both using the same rubric, let's go back to this one, even though I don't love it because it has 3 dimensions. If I was using the same rubric with all of you, if we were all using this rubric, would all of us agree what a 2 on pitch looks and sounds like? Or would some of us give the same performance a 2 and a 1? That's inter-rater reliability. Are we all in agreement on how we would score? And in order to get that, it takes working with your colleagues. It takes creating exemplars, either descriptive words that everybody agrees on, or actual exemplars of the performance or the assignment, so people know this is a 1, this is a 2, this is a 3, and we've agreed on that. And in my case, hopefully that there will be a 4. So without exemplars, rubrics can be challenging to use because you need to be specific about what you are imagining for each level. Rubrics can also be time-consuming to create. Self-assessments. So this is when we ask our students to assess themselves. Here are 2 examples in music. One is a self-assessment of a performance with different elements. One is a self-assessment of their performance in music, whether they sang or played clearly. Demonstrated rhythm. I don't really like that phrase. showed creativity, followed directions, sang and played at an appropriate level, 2 things I did well, 1 thing I will work on. So this is thinking about yourself and your own performance. I have often found that students self-assess more harshly than I assess them. And we get into a really interesting conversation about that. There are some students who say, I am perfect. I don't need to improve, but that's a very small handful. Most students, when you really engage them in self-assessment, are quite critical. So self and peer assessments, and the peer assessment would be, you know, this kind of thing for the class, like on the left, our music performance as a class, right? Some advantages. It helps students get into the habit of mind of self-assessment in any meaningful pursuit, whether it is academic or artistic, and certainly in music. Those of us who engage in it, assess ourselves all the time. When you're practicing, you are always assessing yourself. When you are performing, you are always assessing yourself, right? So getting into the habit of taking that time to assess yourself and reflect and think about what went well and what you could improve in different dimensions and how that would look and what work you would need to do for the next step is a really important thing. And as we talked about earlier in our discussion, it helps students become more independent as practicing artists, in this case, musicians. So that's the next one. It helps them become better at practicing and rehearsing. Musicians self-assess all the time. It helps students learn how to frame assessments of peers more constructively. So if we're talking about the whole class and how did we do in this performance, to be able to provide constructive criticism. This is something you can teach your students about, how to provide constructive suggestions. And as I said, students tend to self-assess more harshly than the teacher would assess them. Disadvantages of self and peer assessments. They are time-consuming to implement and share. You have to teach students how to do this. You need to develop the right assessments and tools. You need to work and spend class time on this. We don't often have it. It's best suited for things like a performance or an assignment. So if you just had your concert, right, the next class to watch the video and do a self-assessment or a group assessment, that kind of thing. Or an assignment like students are handing in a composition and you ask them to self-assess and you're going to assess the composition. Having a rubric can be really helpful so that it gives students a framework to work from. And there are some students, as I said before, who will just say that they deserve the highest score. So I want to take a moment before we go on here and just look at these types of assessments and open it up for questions or comments about these types of assessments. Which of these have you used and found effective? Or what other questions or comments do you have? So I'm going to open it up to you all before we move on. We are going to spend some time today talking about assessments in addition and hopefully developing something. But we talked about these forms of assessment. I'm curious for your thoughts, for your experience to share here. If it would be easier for you to speak, indicate that and I can make that happen. I'll give you a little time. Comments, experiences with assessments, with these particular assessments. The best one that works for me is self-assessment. I let my students watch their performance video and I just hit the pause button to get more specific with the assessment. Fantastic. Jasmine, can you tell us how you document that? Monice, I find that some of these work better with different grade levels than others. I agree. For example, grades 2, 3, and 4 have more experience with rubrics and other areas than younger students. I agree with that, Monice, but you can do rubrics with younger students if in simpler rubrics. So maybe you ask them how they did on something and you have them use a smiley face, a straight line face, and a frowny face. Now, again, it's 3 dimensions. It's not my favorite, but it works for younger students. So do we get a thumbs up, a thumb straight, and a thumb down, right? Which you can have them do in front of themselves. How many people understand what I'm asking you to do? Put a thumb in front of your chest, thumbs up, thumb straight, thumbs down. That's a great check for understanding. Or how did you do on this project? Thumb up, thumb straight, thumb down, or a happy face, straight line face, frowny face. Simplifying it to make it easy, and just a couple of things that you would ask them for in terms of the younger students. Michelle, I find the younger the student, the more simple the assessments, and the older students usually have rubrics. I agree with that. Observations, documentation for the younger students. I'm curious how Jasmine documents the self-assessment when the students watch the performance video. So I want to, hopefully Jasmine will write in, but I want to also see if here it is, a checklist of their goals, articulation, rhythm, etc., and rate themselves 1 to 100. Fabulous, fabulous. Anything else you would like to add about these forms of assessment as we've spoken about them generally? We are going to get into what it means for students with disabilities. We're on our way. Monice, with younger kids often do a finger checklist. If you did this, give yourself a point. I love that. That's great. That's a fantastic idea. These are terrific. A little more time in case someone else wants to write, but we will move on in a moment. Looks like we're mostly using the chat. Q&A is good too. Okay, let's move on. And we did all this. Okay, we're back here. So now I want to think about dimensions of assessment. So this is a whole nother area. Are we assessing what a student has achieved? So today is June 10th. Where are you today? What have you achieved today? Are we assessing progress over time? You started the class in January. What has been your progress over time? So is it achievement at one point? What can you do here? Sort of a snapshot. Or is it a long form time-lapse photography progress, right? Are we assessing effort? Some students can demonstrate either achievement or progress with less effort than other students who require more effort. Does effort play in when we assess our students? Attitude. Do we assess the attitude that our students bring, right? And then the last one, which we will talk a lot about, and it came up earlier in our discussion, but it is a big deal when we're working with our disabled students, and that is independence, what students can do alone. So I'm curious about the assessments that you do through this lens. So when you assess your students, how are you related to achievement, progress, effort, attitude, and independence? So maybe you don't assess attitude at all. Maybe you do. I'm curious about where this plays in for you with assessment. Again, we can go back to the chat and the Q&A. And like I said, if someone would prefer to speak, I can make that happen. But thinking about the assessments that you already do, how do they relate to achievement, progress, effort, attitude, and independence. Very curious for us to share our thoughts here. It's a long question to ask. Something has just come in. Monice, our standards-based report cards, on our standards-based report cards, we have 4 areas, 2 that are aimed at achievement, progress, and independence, and the other 2 are effort and attitude. So they're all there. Having said that, I think there is a direct correlation between effort and attitude and the other 3. So when students demonstrate effort and have a positive, productive attitude, they achieve better, make more progress, and are more independent. Very interesting observation, Moniz, and I think that's really helpful to think about. I want to say that again. When students demonstrate strong effort and come with a positive, constructive attitude, they tend to achieve more, make more progress, and be more independent. And the reverse, I'm sure, is true. Students who don't put in the effort and don't come with a constructive and positive attitude tend to achieve less, make less progress, and be less independent. Thank you for that. Jasmine, attitude is stage etiquette. Achievement is a main song or exercise that they've been working on. Progress is how many bars they can play in a day. Effort is if they're focused. Independence is if they've mastered it. I like the way you're thinking. This feels performance-based, but I see what you're getting at here, and how that maps onto the things that you assess. Fantastic. Let's hear from someone else. Giving it a little time for folks to write. I'd love to hear from someone else. How do achievement, progress, effort, attitude, and independence play out in the assessments that you currently do? a little bit more time. I'm going to move on. If there's more you'd like to say, please let me know. So now thinking about assessments in terms of formative assessments and summative assessments. We've all talked about this before in our lives. Formative assessments are assessments throughout the lesson, unit, or marking period. They're the assessments along the way. Multiple forms of assessment are done for formative assessment, not just the same thing every time. It allows for an ongoing feedback loop between the student and the teacher and has a lot of complexity. Summative assessments is an assessment at the end of a lesson, a unit, or a marking period. A concert can be thought of as a summative assessment, right? But so can other kinds of things. Papers, assignments, performances, compositions, you name it. The summative assessment brings together the whole learning journey, but it's higher stakes because it is a bigger assessment for a larger purpose. Often can be less complex, and there can be a lack of feedback along the way. If all you do are summative assessments, students are missing out on the feedback along the way. If all you do are formative assessments, students are missing out on a bigger opportunity to show what they know and are able to do and tie things together. So I'm curious about some of the formative and summative assessments that you use in your teaching. So again, what are some we've talked about checklists, we've talked about self-assessment, we've talked about observations. Are there other formative and summative assessments that you use in your teaching that you'd like to share? I will give it a couple of minutes. I use centers, says Michelle, as a way to formally assess students right before we have a summative. I love that. I want to hear more about it. So Michelle, I'm going to give you the opportunity to talk. Can you tell us, you need to unmute yourself, how you do that? You are unmuted, but I can't hear you. My volume is up. I can't hear you. I want to make sure I've got you right. Talking permitted. Let's get so we can see you. No? No, I can't do that. Oh, I see why. Okay, talking is permitted, Michelle, but we can't hear you. Here you go. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Oh, sorry. So before we have our summative assessment with note reading, for example, I have centers around the room. Lots of them are game-based, and I get to walk around and observe. So we have SWAT, where somebody says the letter name, and there are 2 sections of the notes on the cabinets, and they have whoever swats it first. But really, honestly, I'm just watching to see if the other person gets there at some point. There's some like puzzle pieces that they have to put them together. One will have the letter name on them, and the other one will have the picture of the letter on the staff.
Nice.
Trying to think of their other ones. Sometimes it's just partners that will hold up a note on the staff, and the other person has to say what the letter is. So that's just a few examples.
So you'll have the centers as a way of formative assessment and also a way to help prepare them for what would the summative be on the note reading? That's actually just basically that's just a piece of paper, actually. They're spread out around the room, and they will have a staff, and the notes will be in different forms. So it won't just be all of them are whole notes. There'll be half notes, whole notes, quarter notes. So I can kind of see if they understand that even though the note is wherever the note is on the staff is actually what the note name is, not what it looks like or if it has a stem or whatsoever. Cool. And what grade are we thinking about with this? 4th and 5th. Fantastic. I love these examples. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to put you back to where you were. There we go. And if you can mute your audio, there you go. Thank you so much, Michelle. Julie, we do a summative assessment using our own observations as well as student and parent answers to a survey we send out ahead of time. Julie, I want to know more about that. So I'm going to do the exact same thing I just did and see if we can get you to speak. If you unmute, you should be able to speak. We need you. There we go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So we, at the end of, I'm a teaching artist, so we do just small string instrument classes before and after school. So we don't have an actual classroom or anything. But we also have, our parents are involved. We have parent meetings. And so we send out a survey at the end of, or usually in April, to survey the students and parents on what their effort looks like from their perspective. So like, how often are you spending with your instrument? Are you practicing with your parent? What things feel frustrating to you? What do you feel like you've made progress with? So there's self-assessment involved from both the parent and the student. And then our observations that we make throughout the year are all plugged into the evaluation sheet that we hand them at the end of the year, which we discuss with them.
I love this. You are getting many layers of data, right? Because you're getting things at the
Right.
student level, at the parent level, at the program level, at the skills level. Fantastic ideas. This, and I think, although it's specific to your situation, I can see ways that people in a classroom could adapt this sort of thing.
Right, right.
Thank you for this. I'm going to put you back to where you were. Whoops, why can't I do it? There we go. And let's read what Moniz had to say. One of the things that I do for a summative assessment is have a grade level performance so that every student has an opportunity to perform for an audience. I love that. Performances are definitely summative assessments. It's where we bring it all in. And if you do it by grade level, you make sure that every student gets an opportunity. I have also been using Blooket and Kahoot to assess things like identifying notes and symbols and instruments. I am a big fan of Blooket and Kahoot, but I bet there are people here, Moniz, who don't know what they are. I'm going to allow you to talk so you can talk about them. So I think if you unmute, you should be ready to roll.
Blooket and Kahoot are two programs that are almost like little quiz programs, but they, well, there's two things. Kahoot in particular keeps data. So you can, if you have the students put their own name on it as they're answering, you can tell what they were able to identify and what they weren't. But they also think it's a game. So like if you are doing it and they're identifying notes, they get invested because they want to get more points and things like that. The other thing that's nice about them is once you've answered the question, Blooket gives you the correct answer because it's like a cycling of information, and Kahoot allows you to actually put whatever media you had up there again and talk to students. Why is this a quarter note and not a half note? If you see that the immediate feedback is that most of them missed it. So they both work out pretty well, both as pre-assessments, practice, and final assessments.
I agree 100%. And they're super engaging and they are very easy for teachers to use. It does not take a lot of time to prepare a Kahoot. So don't feel like, oh God, it's another tool. I can't even. It's quick and you get good information and you get the students engaged. Moniz, I love those. Thank you for that. I am gonna change you back to the other status. Fantastic examples. All right, so where are we going from here? Another area of assessment is authentic versus inauthentic, right? So authentic is where we're aiming. We want assessments that are contextualized in real world tasks. So if we are assessing students on, I'm going to give an example that has nothing to do with music, on how well they make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, we would want to give them a task that has to do with making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We wouldn't say we're assessing the student on how well they make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich by asking them to run a 100-yard dash, right? The assessment is not a real world context that has to do with the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. In music, we want that to be a real world musical set of tasks. We want them to use grown-up music, real music, right? And that way, the assessment is easily transferable to a practical situation. If you're being assessed on how well you actually performed, well, that can be translated to other performance situations, right? Inauthentic assessments are out of context. They might be just looking at a very specific skill that is often not using grown-up or real musical materials and then doesn't transfer well to practical situations. So I think we know what this is, and I don't think we need to discuss examples of what are authentic and inauthentic assessments. I'd like to move on. So let's get to assessments for students with disabilities. How might assessments need to be different for a student with a disability? Think about what you already do and think about what you've been learning in your thoughts. How might assessments need to be different for a student with a disability? What I'd like to do here is give you a little time to think about this. This is a big question. So think about it if you want to scratch down your own notes first, but think about it for a couple of minutes and then put in your thoughts. So we'll give ourselves like 5 minutes to work on this question. Think about it and then please input your thoughts in the chat. How might assessments need to be different for a student with a disability? I'm going to mute myself and let you have at it. All right, giving you a little time to think. Please do type in your thoughts in the chat or Q&A. How might assessments need to be different for a student with a disability? What do you know from your own practice, and what are your thoughts? How might they need to be different? Monice, choices in how to demonstrate learning. Someone who has me at hello with a universal design for learning kind of answer. And I hope you spent time with Rhiannon last week, because Rhiannon is the bomb. Yes, so providing students with choices and how to show what they know and are able to do, because the ways that have been traditionally employed may not be effective for students with disabilities who learn differently. Michelle, they may need an assessment I read to them, or they may need a scribe. Okay, let's stop there for a second. So just handing out an assignment for an assessment may not work. Some students may need to take in the information, again, a beautifully universal design for learning answer, by hearing it. Or they may not be able to write, and they may need a scribe to help them write. They may need access to speech-to-text software. You bet there are students who need access to that to help them write. They may need modifications, such as 1 question per page. Goes back to what you learned from Shana about decluttering the page. Very important. Or fewer words to choose from. Some students, depending on how their brains are wired, if there are too many choices, it becomes overwhelming. So fewer choices. And as Shana talked with you about, lots on the page can be overwhelming. Less on a single page, you bet. They may need different goals altogether. Absolutely. You may need to provide them with different goals because that's where they are. I have a student, this is in Michelle's words, with disabilities, and that their main goal is to be in the classroom. Yes, I've had a number of these cases where the goal for the student is to be able to come to class and stay in class. And working on extending that time is the most important goal for them right now. They will participate when they're ready, but first we got to get them there, right? And that's absolutely true. Michelle, great examples. Monice, fewer questions. Yes, this is a biggie. We want to know everything, but for some of our students, too many questions or prompts is overwhelming. More time, 100%. Many of our students need more time to process information, to provide, to actually perform the assessment. Focusing on one aspect at a time, step by step, that structure, right? Breaking it down step by step, and picture choices. We don't need to always use words. Monice, these are great examples. Jasmine, I use accommodations and adaptations when assessing students with high support needs. The rubric is slightly different to measure their engagement on the task. Okay, I would love to know more specifics about what those look like, but yes, we want to make sure that you modify the rubric. And it might be more about measuring engagement than measuring achievement for certain students, if that's where they are. So that's great. These are all fantastic answers. And this is just the beginning. So let's talk a little bit about what that's going to look like after we stretch. Oh, we're right at the perfect moment. Let's take a 5-minute stretch break. I have 10:50. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Stay connected to the Zoom room, but feel free to move about for 5 minutes. We'll be back at 10:55 my time. Thanks. We'll come back in just about a minute. Okay, we are back. So, assessment for students with disabilities, important considerations. We need to find the best way for a student to show what they know and are able to do. We think about, and we heard this in our suggestions from all of you, multiple modes of action and expression from Universal Design for Learning, right? We need to provide students with multiple ways. Music has all these standard ways that students show what they know and are able to do, but students with disabilities are going to need other ways. So providing multiple ways for them to show and finding the best way that gets at what that student knows and is able to do. The learning journeys of our students with disabilities look different. We need to understand that they are unique, and we need to realize that a lot of times learning is happening, but we just can't see it. So we've seen a lot of times in our work, long plateaus with students, and then what appears to be a big jump in their ability or understanding. I would argue that it is not a plateau with a jump, that learning has been happening this whole time, but we couldn't see it. The student didn't demonstrate it, maybe because they were anxious, maybe because some aspect of the physical coordination was unclear, maybe because they just needed more time, maybe because it wasn't completely and deeply understood and integrated. Whatever that might be, that learning was taking place the whole time. So it's on us not to miss what our students are learning by providing multiple ways and finding the best way for a student to show what they know and are able to do. Also, the other consideration is not just assessing the task, skill, or concept, but how independently that student can perform it, what level of support the student needs, and thinking about Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. If a student is here unassisted and here with assistance, this space in between is their zone of proximal development, and how can we get them independently to expand what they're able to do? So important to think about multiple forms of assessment to understand the student's unique learning journey and the level of independence at which a student can do certain things. So I want you to think about a musical skill that you teach. Can be in any setting at all. How do you typically assess that skill? And then what are some other ways that you could assess that skill so that a student could demonstrate their understanding? And what are some ways that can meet a student with a disability or a diagnosis where they are? So I'm going to give you an example, and then I'm going to send you on your merry way to do a little work for a few minutes. Let's say the example is dictation. So how well students can turn what they hear into musical notation. So the way it's typically assessed is a dictation test where the teacher plays something and the students write it down. What are some other ways you could assess whether students can translate what they hear into notation? So for example, error detection. Students could be looking at a piece of music and someone could play something with a mistake and the student identifies where the mistake was, right? Or having the student read the notation and play or sing what they read, right? That shows that they can translate sound into notation and notation into sound. There are other examples, but those are a couple. And then some ways to meet a student where they are. Well, I think with that, we need to go to the barriers. What barriers, and this is a very Universal Design for Learning perspective, might there be? So if the typical way of assessing understanding going from sound to notation is dictation. What could some of the barriers be? If dictation is done with a paper and pencil, there are some students for whom writing musical notation is a barrier. Or maybe the size of the staff on the page that they're writing, they need more space. And if writing with a pencil is hard, maybe they need manipulatives instead, or a software program to use instead. So thinking about the barriers allows you to think about other kinds of assessments for that skill. So what I'd like to do is give you, I think we can do this in probably 5 minutes. Think of a skill that you teach. How do you typically assess it? What are some other ways? And particularly thinking about our students with disabilities. So I have 11 o'clock. We're going to come back at 11:05. And I can't wait to see what you come up with. Let me unmute. All right, let's hear from you. We've already got something in the chat. Jasmine, one musical skill. Oops, I lost it here. One musical skill I teach my nonverbal student is note reading. And when I ask him to identify a pitch, he uses solfege and hand signs. After identifying the pitch, I let him play it on the keys. I love incorporating hand signs, particularly for a nonverbal student. That's fantastic. And I love that it goes from pitch to solfege or hand sign to the keyboard. That those multiple representations are fantastic. Thanks, Jasmine. That's awesome. Monice, when asking questions to identify notes by name or value duration, I would often show them the note and ask them to give the answer. For a student who is nonverbal, having some cards with the names and the notes values to choose from, absolutely. So they're using the cards as a communication device. Limiting the choices for the answers in the card set, you bet. So there aren't too many choices. Another would be to say the name of the note and have the student pick out the note from an appropriate number of picture choices. Great. So we're looking at visual tools that we're using for communication with limited choices. Fantastic, Monice. Michelle, teaching about instrumental families. Students will answer questions about what characteristics a woodwind, brass, string, or percussion instrument may have. Students are then given a picture of an imaginary instrument that they need to tell me what family they think it belongs to. Different ways to assess. Students will be given a page with multiple instruments on it. They can circle woodwind with blue, brass with red crayons, etc. Great. So they're making the families in a different kind of visual way. Students with disabilities can be given a choice board with 2 different instrument pictures they can choose. The woodwind, brass, percussion can be repeated with 2 more pictures. So 2 choices, and then choose which one is the woodwind instrument, which one is the brass instrument, right? And I agree. Just a couple of choices. These are great. Thank you, Michelle. Excellent suggestions. Anybody else who would like to chime in? I'll give it a little time because it takes time to type. And then we'll move on to our next activity. I'm going to move forward. If more things come up, please feel free to add them to the chat. So we need to go out of the standard ways that students show what they know and are able to do. So here are some non-standard ways. A standard assessment for a sight reading might be a sight reading task. Other possibilities, a prepared section to start and then insert a measure or a phrase to read at sight. So they start by performing or singing something that they already know, but then you insert something unfamiliar. So they are grounded in the familiar and then go to unfamiliar instead of giving someone a whole piece of sight reading, right? Or giving the student time to review the unfamiliar piece away from the instrument before playing or singing it, right? Again, a little time to process the information before they do it. A dictation exam using paper and pencil, as I said before, a dictation exam using manipulatives. Solo singing, small group singing. Small groups, you can still hear the individuals, right? An improvisation task could turn into a composition task, slows down the processing time. An ear training task where you hear something and you speak to identify it, using error detection, as I spoke about before. So how can we get out of the restrictions of the standard assessments that have been happening in music education forever and ever? Another activity, layering assessments. So now I want you to think about a musical skill that you teach. It can be the same one we were just talking about or something different. And think about a student with a disability or a diagnosis. How do you typically assess it? What are some of the supports that the student with a disability uses in performing that skill? How could you assess the skill level and the amount or kinds of supports? So we're trying to get an independence here. So let's say you have, I'm going to give an example. That's a good example. Let's go to ear training with manipulatives. Let's say you have a dictation task that you normally assess with paper and pencil, and with the student with disabilities uses manipulatives. How could you assess the skill level and the amount and kinds of support? Maybe you provide the student, instead of manipulatives, with computer software. Could they do the task on their own with computer software? Or that's a different kind of support. Or you could see, you could have paper and pencil and manipulatives and say, I'm playing something. Write what you can write and use manipulatives for what you need to use manipulatives for. So to have them use a combination. Can they write some of it, or can they not write any of it? Or you could say they have a person sitting with them while they're using the manipulatives, and that's their support, and you have them try it on their own, or have the person available to them but not sitting right with them. So we're looking at different levels of support to get at how much support does the student need, how independent are they? So it's layering, not just assessing the skill, but adding the extra layer of support and independence. I'm going to give you more time for this one because it's a little bit more complex. So I have 11:12. I'm going to give you 7 minutes to think about this and be ready to put something in the chat. I'm very curious about not just how you assess the skill, but how those supports are used for your student with disabilities, and how we can think about them as moving away from those supports and their level of support and independence. Here we go. Okay, we're back. I'd like to talk a little bit about your thoughts around layering assessments, and lo and behold, there's stuff in the chat. I love it. Great. So Jasmine, when my student performs a song, I usually move away from him to allow him to play by himself. I gauge his skill level by the level of prompting he needs or his independence. Absolutely. So making sure that independence is a part of this equation is really important so that we can think about not only the amount, but the types of supports our students need, which could change over time. Right? So a student might need, and I know you talked about this with Nadia, for example, hand over hand support for certain tasks at a certain stage, and then not later on, maybe just a verbal reminder, right? So it's the amount of support and the type of support. Monice, when we are working on the xylophone, I have a couple of students who can play a piece with someone pointing at the bars. In working towards independence, instead of pointing at each note, the adult might stop pointing at the notes one by one, then only helping to find the first note. Finally taking, so instead of first you're pointing at every note, then maybe you're just helping with the first note or the first note of each phrase, right? And then taking away the pointing altogether. So fading that prompt, beautifully done. Then using a song with a similar set of notes to see if they can transfer it and do it without the supports. I love all of this. I think a lot of people get stuck around supports for our students with disabilities and think, well, this is the support they need, and they need that support all the time, and this is the way they're going to do the task. When they do the task, they'll always use this support. And I want to encourage us to think about that. The amount and type of support will change as our students become more comfortable, learn more, grow, and we need to be ready for that. And it also can go back and forth. Someone might need more support on one day, come into class another day, need less, and then regress the next week and need to go back to the higher support level. So we need to be careful about how we gauge supports and not just assume, okay, this support has worked, it will always be there. And I've seen a lot of that in my observations, and that can be a challenge. So it really is something that we're calibrating along with the student, and that helps in terms of how we assess them. Fantastic. So this is a layered checklist that is used at a school in Puerto Rico that is a school only for students with autism in their music program. So there's the skill. So on the left-hand side are the students. Each row is a student. And then there's a particular skill. And that's listed here as a column. Skill number 1, match the color on the drum by playing it on each drum. Column 2, play the color patterns on the drum set. Play 3, play the pattern, bass drum, snare drum, bass drum. Play a drum and rhythm pattern with the hi-hat, snare, and bass drum. So there's 4 different tasks, but where a student is measured not only in terms of what task they do, but how independently they do it. So L1, or a number 1, means the student shows interest in the task and attempts it. Level 2 means they do it, but they need a lot of help and prompts. Level 3, they do it with minimal help and prompts. Level 4, they're independent, but they're inconsistent. And level 5, they are independent. So here we see different students on different attempts. So if you look, for example, at the top row, this particular student has made 2 attempts at the first task, and they were both at level 2. They've made 1 attempt at the second task, and it was level 1. If we go down a ways, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th row down, just before that, those couple of empty rows, you've got a student who's made 2 attempts at the first task, 1 at level 5, 1 at level 4, 2 attempts at the second task, both at level 4, and 3 attempts at the third task, 2 at level 2 and 1 at level 3. So you see the idea here. So we're getting layers. It's not just the task and that the student is attempting the task, but where they are in terms of support. So I like this checklist. I think it's a good layered checklist. So that's the independent piece. And the independence piece is particularly important as we've been discussing. So I want to stop here and look at time and see where we are. Okay, good. We're exactly where I wanted us to be. So think about what we have talked about regarding assessment. What questions come to your mind, or what would you like to discuss? So please indicate in the chat if or Q&A. And as I said, we can give folks permission to talk. Questions, comments, thoughts that come to your mind based on our discussion today. I'll give it a little bit of time. Let's see. How often should we assess our students? Is there a specific time frame? There's no mandate from the world of education that effective teachers assess their students X amount of times. Sometimes your setting has standardized assessments that you have to use, as we heard from Monice, who teaches in the public school system. Really, I believe we should be assessing our students as often as we can, even in an informal way. Through observation, we should be assessing our students as often as possible, right? And good teachers do this, right? We don't teach in a dark room far away from our students. We are teaching in interaction with our students. We are noticing if students are with us. We are checking for understanding, even with the thumbs, as I talked about. We are watching students as they perform tasks, right? So those informal assessments that may not even be documented should be happening all the time as a feedback loop. But then we should be making sure that we are providing students with assessments along the way, and of course, something summative. So we want to be assessing them along the way as they're learning, and we want to give them opportunities to pull their learning together. I'm not answering your question with a specific amount of times or number, because it's different depending on the students, the setting, the material, right? But we should be assessing our students as much as we reasonably can. We don't want to only be assessing our students. We're teaching, right? And we're helping them to develop their skills and their knowledge. So we are not just assessors, we are educators. And the assessment, as you all described so well, has educational purposes that are significant and important. It's not just done for the sake of doing it. But we want to be assessing our students as much as we reasonably can, because it makes us better teachers and it allows our students to learn better and to understand their learning. So that is the answer I'm going to give you. Probably not what you were hoping for, but I think it's the right answer. Let's see what else comes up. Some more time. All right, I'm going to move on to our next section because we are here. It's 11:30. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to do some more strategies, and we're going to do some logistics. So we'll take a 5-minute break. Here we go. Okay. Coming back in 1 minute to do some work on strategies. And just about there. Okay. So We're going to talk about some strategies for teaching students with disabilities in music settings. And we're going to start with the concept that Autism Speaks has this wonderful saying, you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. I like to say, you've met one person with a disability or a diagnosis, you've met one person with a disability or a diagnosis. Diagnoses have very significant utility in certain areas, in the medical profession, in the psychological profession, in schools, in legal environments, particularly that aspect of school. But for educators, in terms of how to teach someone, diagnoses have very limited utility. I have a lot of teachers who come to me and say, you know, well, how do you teach students with autism? And they're expecting one set of strategies that works with all students with autism. And it just doesn't work that way. There's so much variation among our individuals who are disabled in every way that it's not a recipe at all. Instead, it requires what I call good teaching on steroids. This is taking the tools of good teaching that we already know, deepening them, personalizing them, customizing them, giving them more dimensions, what I like to call steroidifying them. And it really has to do with getting to know your students well and reaching them. And that takes time. We see lots of students once a week if we're lucky, but we get them for multiple years. So it may take time. Give yourself a break. It will take time to get to know your students well. But as you do, it will make your teaching better for all of your students, because you are not going to be doing something brand new, foreign, that's falling from the sky. You're going to be doing work that is necessary for some and helpful for all. So a piece of this work that I think is really important is that we need to, as educators, to shift the way that we think. So one big question is learning taking place? So, for example, you might, I've heard this from teachers, I've got a student and they're failing my class. They obviously aren't practicing. They obviously aren't studying, because if they put the work in, they would do well. They're not putting the work in, they're lazy, right? Something else might be going on here. And so I don't like to stop at that surface, you know, student not doing well, therefore they're not practicing or studying or putting in the work, right? Something else might be going on here. It might have to do with, as we've been talking about today, the mode of action and expression. How are you asking students to show what they know and are able to do? And maybe the student needs another way. We've talked about that a bunch today. There may be barriers to how well the student can demonstrate their learning. There may be other things going on. The student might be anxious. Have you thought of that? The student might have other things going on in their lives that are making it very challenging for them to focus or for them to get the work done. The student might not have access to a space to do that practicing, or a place, a quiet place to do that work at home. So we need to think about other things that are going on, and we need to engage a different way of thinking about whether learning is taking place that we might not be able to see. And related to that, what else could be going on? So I've had teachers say to me, I have a student who sits in the back of the room and they are non-compliant. I don't know what to do. The student refuses to participate. They're going to fail my class. They're going to do terribly. You know, what do we do? And again, I want to ask, does the student experience anxiety or social anxiety? Is the student experiencing some interpersonal issue with another student in the room? Is the student experiencing challenges at home? Is the student experiencing challenges having their basic needs met and satisfied? Was there a transition in the student's life? Did a teacher that they were very close to suddenly not be assigned to them? Did a family member move away or pass away, right? Thinking deeply about what else could be going on that the student may not be able to communicate with you, but that is contributing to a behavior that at first blush would read as non-compliance, but really something else is happening. So what we're going to talk about today are what I call, using a basketball metaphor, high percentage teaching strategies. So in basketball, there's a thing called high percentage shots. So there are statisticians in basketball that keep track of, depending on where a player is standing on the basketball court, the percentage of time, if they shoot the ball from that spot, that it goes into the basket. There are some people, for example, who are great at three-point shooting, and people know this. There are other players who are not so good at three-point shooting. There are some who are great from the foul line. There are others who are not great. There are some, I do not know how these people do this, who shoot from what's called the corner. The basket's here, and they're like even with the basket, but in the corner of the court, and somehow that ball goes in every time. I do not understand it. There are some players who can do that, right? So high percentage shots are shots that have a high likelihood of going into the basket. High percentage teaching strategies are teaching strategies that have a high percentage of success, no matter who you're working with. You don't even need to know if there's a diagnosis or a disability or not. This is just approaches to teaching that will up your effectiveness with everyone. And we're going to look at three of them: structure and schedule, multiple modalities, and the visual modality and color coding. There are many, many more. Today, we're going to look at these three. Structure and schedule. Every human being on the planet likes to know what's going to happen before it happens. And students with disabilities who often experience anxiety about whether social aspects of their life, physical aspects of their life, whether they're going to be asked to do something they don't understand, whether they're going to be included or excluded, whether a space or a situation or a set of rules or policies is going to be accessible for them. It goes on and on. Never mind peer relationships, having trouble making friends, feel worried about being singled out by their peers, right? There's a lot of anxiety. Having a structure or a schedule is a really effective way to alleviate that anxiety. I'm a big fan of two kinds of structures. This is what we see here is an example of the microstructure. This is a student's private lesson listing all of the activities they're going to do with a checkbox. And when the student completes each activity, they're going to check it off on that list. This is on a mini whiteboard. So not only does it list everything, so it's the microstructure of what's happening in that session, but it is being telegraphed, which is another big theme for me, where the student is interacting with the schedule. And it could be this kind of checklist, or it could be the teacher having the list on the whiteboard of what they're going to do in class today and saying, we're starting with this, and then we're going to do this. And then you do that thing. We just did this. Now we're going to do this. So you're using the schedule. That's what I call the microstructure. I also am a big fan of macro structure, which is that classes tend to have a similar flow. So in a music setting, let's say it's band, students come in, they pick up their music, they put their instruments together, they go to their places, they put their instruments together. There's a series of warm-ups, then they do a familiar piece, then they do something new, then they do something that they're looking at for the first time. Then they do something very familiar that's very successful. There's some kind of closing activity. Then they put their instruments back in the cases and put their materials back and leave. That basic structure that we don't communicate explicitly, but that happens just about every time they come into the room. Now, obviously, closer to a concert, that structure is going to change. Right after a concert, that structure is going to change. But that generally speaking, the macro structure of the class is the same. You don't have to tell them. They just subliminally and subconsciously come to know what to expect when they come into that room. And it is a sense of assurance and a sense of safety. And that's what we really want to create in our classes, particularly for our students with anxiety and our students with disabilities, is that sense of safety. So macro structure and microstructure. Multiple modalities. We all know that there is the visual modality, the auditory modality, the kinesthetic modality. We also all know that teaching in multiple modalities helps learning stick, right? I would argue that aside from our big three, there are other modalities. Some students learn well from direct experience. Some students learn well in social settings. Some people learn well when they hear sounds. Some people learn well by teaching someone else. Some people, like my computer friends, learn well just by trying something new and exploring all its features. These are modalities that I made up. But I do think that visual, auditory, and kinesthetic being our big three, we can also think about others. But there are multiple ways of learning, and learning sticks more when we provide more. We also know that the arts are inherently multimodal. No art form only has one modality. However, each art form has a modality that dominates it. And obviously in music, that is the auditory modality. My experience over the years has taught me that arts educators tend to privilege the modality that dominates their art form when they teach. Music teachers tend to teach auditorially. It makes sense. We traffic in sound. We are helping people become better at producing sounds, understanding sounds, manipulating sounds, right? But the problem is we lose our kinesthetic learners and our visual learners when we are auditory. And even if someone learns auditorially, the learning is going to stick better for everyone if we teach it in multiple modalities. Moving along with that, the visual modality, to me, as an educator, whatever you are teaching, is the most important modality. And this is the reason. Every other modality is time limited. An auditory experience happens in a moment in time. Yes, you can record it and play it back, but that's a whole lot of work. Essentially, you've said something and that's it. Or you've played something and that moment has taken place and it passes. Similarly with kinesthetic experiences, you've done that movement activity and then it's over. Yes, you can video record it and play it back, but a lot of work. Really, you've done that activity, you've done that kinesthetic experience, and it's a moment in time. Visual modalities last longer. They are also a support. So if you give students instructions verbally, and you have a visual on the board that shows that instruction, that visual on the board is also a support. So the student who needs extra processing time for what they hear, they can see it on the board. The student for whom English is not their first language, they can see it on the board. The student who was having trouble focusing and was feeling distracted, the instructions on the board. The student who has trouble with short-term memory, that instruction's on the board, right? So the visual of having that instruction written out supports students long after your auditory instructions have been spoken, right? And that's true for anything. Using a visual support to help our students, it sticks around. That visual modality of providing information, of giving materials, of showing students what they need to know, having a visual, could be on the whiteboard, could be a worksheet or a laminated sheet with at the student's desk, right? Could be on a bulletin board, whatever it needs to be. That visual that you are using to teach then becomes a support at the same time. And that to me gives the visual modality a unique place in education and in pedagogy. Color coding is a really important aspect of this. And I know you talked about color coding with Shayna and with Gretchen and with Nadia, but let's talk about it here. Visual information can be overwhelming, especially for individuals who have challenges processing. So we've talked before, even today, about not having too much information on one page or one screen. Absolutely true, because it's too much to take in. It's hard to figure out what's important. It's hard to go through it all. It feels overwhelming. When we have visual information, using color coding to organize it can be very helpful. By this, I do not mean that the piece of paper or the screen has many different colors on it. And it's all, a whole rainbow on there. I think you want maybe 2 colors. So maybe you're looking at a piece of music and there's a theme that comes back again and again. So every time you see it, it's highlighted in yellow. And then maybe also there are dynamic changes, and you highlight those in red. That's enough. We don't need to highlight any more than 2 things on a page, but that will help organize the visual information for the students. So now there's patterns that are readily available thanks to the color coding. Really important. We don't want to overdo it, but it's a really important tool. Fair does not mean equal. This is an inclusion-based concept that is really important for us to think about. So we're back in the dark ages when I was a student. There was no inclusion. I was a student in public schools in the 70s and early 80s. And where we were in the United States at that time was that disabled students in public school systems almost all the time were completely separated from everybody else. And my public school system was no exception. There were students with disabilities in my public school system. They were in a separate building. We never saw them. We never interacted with them. We never had any activities with them. It's a huge loss for me. I never got to know these people, right? This was not by any ill will. This is where education was and where disability in our society was at this time. So I didn't have inclusion classes. Although I would argue, I'm sure that there were students in some of my classes that were undiagnosed. But generally speaking, there was no inclusion, right? So in my education, we were obsessed as students with fairness. We wanted everybody to be treated exactly the same. So if the general music teacher was handing out lummy sticks, if student number 1 got 2 yellow lummy sticks, then everybody else should get 2 yellow lummy sticks. If somebody got 2 red ones, it's not fair. It's not equal. It's not the same. Even though, yeah, they're both rhythm sticks. They're both going to work. Doesn't matter. Everybody else got yellow. We all want yellow, right? So that was the obsession back then. We have moved as a profession in the US to more inclusion. Inclusion is a big topic. Beyond the scope of today's conversation, I will say this. There are many ways that inclusion can look. There are some forms of inclusion that are very effective. There are some forms of inclusion that are just having people with disabilities and people without disabilities in the same room, but not doing anything necessarily to include everybody. So inclusion is not always the same. It plays out differently and has different levels of effectiveness. In addition, every individual is different. Some individuals with disabilities really do well in inclusion settings and in every subject and in every kind of educational interaction. Some do well in certain circumstances and not so well in others. And for some, inclusion really isn't the best way that they learn. So inclusion is complicated and probably needs to be a whole nother session. But when there is inclusion, when we have students who have different challenges, different strengths, different ranges of ways that they contribute and ways that they need support, we need to think about what it means to be fair. And fair does not, in that case, mean giving every student the same thing. Rather, fair means giving every student what they need in order to succeed in that class, in that moment, at that task, right? So one student might need an extra visual aid. Another student might need noise canceling headphones. Another student might need extra time, right? We all know this from IEPs and the work that we do. Because there's much more inclusion in educational settings in the US, particularly in public schools, students are much more understanding of this concept and of this set of values than they were back in my day. And this is something that we can reinforce throughout the school building and throughout the school day, that everywhere we go in school, each person gets what they need in order to succeed. So that concept is very important. Those are our high percentage strategies. I want to take a moment for any questions that come up, and then we're going to talk about study group logistics to make sure we're on the same page, and next week, so that we're ready for that as well. So let me give this a moment for folks to write anything in the chat, any comments or questions or discussion on the high percentage strategies that I presented just now, or anything that we talked about today, we can take a few minutes and I will give you some time to put things in the chat. And as we've said, if folks need to talk, talking is good, we can make that happen. So I'll wait for you for a little bit. Questions that are coming up for you or thoughts before we transition? You may be hearing my cat in the background who is asking me why I have not been available. It will come soon, Kitty. Something in the chat. Moniz, I think sometimes for all students, rubrics can be an overwhelming amount of information. I often couple them with a checklist. Have you ever seen a rubric that has video and pictures? Do I think this would be effective? Great question. I have seen rubrics with pictures in particular. I think they can be very effective. And I know one teacher who's done a rubric with videos. There's two ways that I've seen it done. One is a rubric and then a video of the teacher explaining the rubric, and another is a rubric with a video and a rubric, and the video is some examples of here's what a 4 would look like in this task. Here's what to give students specific examples. The tricky part there is, as we all know, when we give examples to our students, that's what we end up getting from them, right? They end up giving us back exactly what we gave them. If we want something, more creative than that, depends on what the task is, right? I do think making rubrics easy to understand and not too overwhelming for students is really important. I like the idea of pictures and symbols just to break up all the text. Yeah. Great question, Moniz. I'm going to transition to the other slideshow. The chat is still open. I'm stopping this share and getting to my other slideshow where we'll talk about logistics. But feel free to keep using the chat. I just need to open a different PowerPoint. This one. Okay. Oh, here comes one. I was thinking examples with the video to demonstrate for the comment about getting what, yeah, exactly. So I'm glad that's helpful. Showing examples, it's always tricky. You want students to understand concretely what you're looking for, but you also want to empower them to do what they want to contribute. All right. Here are the study group logistics. You've seen this before. And just to walk us through again, because we are getting to project time. here we are on the synchronous session schedule, and we're wrapping up today, 9:30 to 12:30 with me. And then at 1 o'clock, Vicki will be here working with you in a different link on behavior management. And then next week is projects, right? So we've already talked about what a project is. Oh, you're going to get the recordings. Let me do this. Full participation of the study group is 18 hours of sessions, can be level 1, level 2, or a mixture of both, can be synchronous or asynchronous. Make sure you do all 5 of the between session engagements. There'll be one after this, after today's sessions too. We need 5 of those. And then creating and presenting a study group project. And then we will wait a few weeks after the study group ends to send out the certificates of participation, because there'll be some asynchronous folks who will be still working, and that's fine. So remember the between session engagement Google documents, those are important, and you have to do 5 of them, 1 for each week that we've met, except the 6th week, which is projects. We don't have one there. So projects are an application of some aspect of what you learn in this study group to your own teaching situation. I've had some people want to show us what they're already doing. That's not really a project. A project is something new that you are doing based on what you've been learning. So I think it's great that we're already doing, my cat just jumped on me. I think it's great that we're already doing some fabulous things and we want to share them. That's awesome. And sharing those with your colleagues, go for it. But for this purpose, for the project, we don't want to see what you're already doing. We want to see something new, something that you have learned from this study group and how you have applied it to your teaching situation. And remember, it can take lots of different forms, and we don't have much time together. So they are snapshots of works in progress, and the deliverable is going to depend on what you do. We're going to present them in our final 2 sessions, and the presentation is 5 minutes maximum. It can be a slideshow, a video, an oral presentation, 5 minutes maximum. You'll be given opportunities to talk at that point. Anybody who cannot attend the session should submit the project, and I will present them and give feedback to them on your behalf. I will be providing feedback to all of the projects as we go. So what will happen is I'll start the session and we'll see who's here and who's got projects to present, and we'll have them present. And then later, once we've gone through those, I will present what else I have on file where folks aren't there. That's how it works. So how do we get them on file? We'll talk about that in a minute. You had the Google Doc where you inputted your ideas, and I've been responding to those ideas. And the way the projects are going to be submitted, I'll stop the share, is I'm going to share a Google folder with you on Tuesday. So you'll get a Google folder to put in your project. And I'm going to ask, for the first time this year, we're going to use a naming convention, because it's been difficult for me to figure out sometimes what the projects are and who they belong to based on the name of the document. So I'm going to ask you to name it with your name, your full name, and the word project, so that I know that it's yours. You get the idea, because sometimes it just says project. I don't know whose it is, because I'll be the one sharing the screen and sharing it with everybody as for the presentations. So that Google Drive folder is coming to you on Tuesday, along with the between session engagement for today. There'll be a link sent out for the Zooms later next week. But that's how the project piece is going to work. So whatever you create, you're going to upload to that Google Drive folder. Are there questions about any of that around the projects that I can answer for you now? Or about full participation? Any of the logistical things? questions about projects or about logistics? Give it a little bit longer, but we may end up finishing a speck early, which is totally fine. I'm very excited for the projects. It's always a fun session, both of them. And if you're attending level 1 and level 2, you know, whenever you're there, we'll have you present. But it's always fun because people have come up with some really great ways of applying what they've learned. And just even starting out with checking out how it's going, right? Applying something and then, gee, how did that work for me? What would I need to change? Some really good ideas have come out of this group. So I'm excited, and I'm really looking forward to the ideas that I've seen in the Google Doc, with the caveat that we want to do something new. I'm going to let it wait for just a little bit longer. I would hate to miss a question or a comment. All right, hearing none, I am going to thank you all for being here today. The slides from this session will also be sent out to you on Tuesday. It is a pleasure to hang out with all of you and talk about assessment and working with our students with disabilities in music classroom settings. And I see a question. No question. Oh, I'm really happy to hear that, Moniz. Thank you. It's my pleasure. That's wonderful. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. Stick around for Vicky, who will be with you at 1 o'clock this afternoon. I am actually going to be helping out with a sensory friendly performance here in Boston. So Eliza on my team will get things started with Vicky. And I will see you next week at 9:30 or at 1 o'clock, depending on when we see you. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me by email if more questions come up. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.